Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
What's the future of the Republican Party? Can it be saved? Well, with 2020 around the corner, a lot of people are focused on this upcoming election, and it's understandable why you might be. Although today, what Lance and I are going to look at is the future of the Republican Party. And there's kind of two different futures that we want to talk about because there's two different possibilities. There's the possibility of a Donald Trump victory, right? President Trump winning re-election this November. And where does the Republican Party go from that point forward? And then there's also the possibility, right, of a President Donald Trump defeat in November. And where does the Republican Party go from there? Those are kind of what we want to look at today. And the reason this is important, right, if you're tuning in and say you're a Republican, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, right, this is your party. You should care about what its future is, what the next steps are. And I think that any party, right, should care about how are we selling ourselves to the next generation, because that's how you ensure long-term survival. Although if you're a Democrat, right, it might be a little more, you might be questioning, well, why should I care about this? I would like for the Republican Party to die off. Well, before you think that, and even if you do think that, knowing more about what might be on the horizon for the Republican Party and really how it's changed just since 2010, these are things that are going to either help you, right, be smarter about how you're voting, smarter about the candidates you're looking at on your side of the aisle, or it might make you think maybe there's some things about the Republican Party that I actually do like, or some things that I should help change, right? So there's a lot of different ways you could care, but the Republican Party is, roughly half of the nation and half of the people in it. So it's important to keep that in mind and think about where they're headed from here. But we couldn't begin a conversation on the future of the Republican Party without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, and don't forget, the party will change whether Trump wins re-election or does not, because a second-term president doesn't carry the political hammer that they do during their first term, because they can always say, well, if I win re-election, you better get in line with me because I have the power to get rid of you or affect you in some kind of negative or positive fashion. You have that political power. Once the second term is started and you're on your way out, because at least right now, the Constitution says it limits you to 2 terms as president. People begin to say, yeah, you're going to be gone in at least 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. And others in your party begin jockeying for position to take your place. They hope that you do very, very well in your second term so that people are enamored with the party. And that's another reason why you care if you're Republican and Democrat, because if the Republican Party, if people continue to support it, the majority does, you want to be the successor of as the leader of the Republican Party if you're Donald Trump. Also, if you are the Democrats, you want to watch what happens, because if you lose this election, then that's what you're going to be running against, is what develops in the next 4 years. So, this has got something for everybody in it. We're not trying to, in this this episode, we're not trying to predict who's going to win. It's just to look at the evolution of the Republican Party, which, so that's kind of threw that one in there for the conservatives, the word evolution.
Oh, Lance. So we are also going to look at, I don't know when, Lance, I'm sure in the next few weeks, right? We'll probably do an episode that's about the future of the Democrats. And we've already kind of talked about that some, because the primary season, right, for the Democrats, there was a lot more going on there and a lot to look at in terms of there's these different ideas, right, about the way the party could go from the Democrat side. It could go back toward the middle some. It could go further to the left, more towards socialism. there's different thoughts, and there were different candidates advocating different things. So we've given quite a bit of time to that, and we didn't really have the opportunity, just because, it didn't make as much sense. Donald Trump didn't have any real challengers in the primaries, to talk about that. The party was going the way of Trump, and that's the way it's been for the last, 4 years, ever since he became president. And, but now we have to look at, like Lance said, whether it is, right this November, and the Republicans have to start thinking about what's next because they lose, or it's not even 4 years out, folks, because keep in mind there's going to be the midterm elections. And, generally speaking, right, that's kind of that breaking point for the second term of a president, where their influence over the direction of the party does start to kind of wane a little bit, because the party isn't as shackled to them as they have been previously. So either way, whether it's, in a couple months or in a year or so, which is when the election process will start to get underway for the midterms, they're going to have to be thinking about this. And this, Lance, to me, is where these articles come into play, because it's actually it's neat. We got one right from the Wall Street Journal that we're looking at, and we've got one from the New York Times that we're looking at. And the titles, just to share with you how Trump has changed the Republicans, is the Wall Street Journal. And the New York Times is Where Do the Republicans Go From Here? And they both make a contention, Lance, about new wave Republicans. So what I want to do is I want to read both of these, and then I want to let our audience and you and I talk about, how is this different, right, than Republicans of the past? What's this mean?
Before you do that, I just want to make a point. I do think, just for the record, in the next 5 years, we will see major changes in both political parties, as long as among their stances and what they want to do for people. I think this is a transition election to where we have two older white males that are running for president. But I think the country is on the cusp of seeing more diversity in their presidential candidates and accepting that. And I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm not passing a judgment, but I just feel like this could be the last of the old guard, and we see new faces on both sides of the aisle start to jockey for position of the parties, which will change the direction of both parties.
I also want to make a recommendation for people. I have like 2 or 3 minutes left. Brett and I, Lance, over the weekend watched something called The Social Dilemma, which is a new documentary that was released on Netflix, and highly recommend it to folks, because it talks a lot about the political divide and how we got to where we are and the role that technology is playing in it. It's difficult to watch because it's frightening, because it's so easy to see what's being presented as the truth. And it isn't one of the great things about it for our audience, Lance, is it's not politically motivated in terms of it's not saying, this is good or bad for Democrats or good or bad for Republicans. It's saying, no, this is bad for the country, because it's pushing people to these extremes.
Right.
And that's part of, I just wanted to share that because I didn't want to forget before we get into kind of these two contentions. I don't think we'll have time to go through both, but we'll start with the Wall Street Journal one, and then maybe Lance in the next segment will break down the New York Times one. So from the Wall Street Journal article, for many of these new wave Republicans, the message is this: conservatives faltered over time by becoming too enamored of their own ideology, too committed to globalization and free trade, and too indifferent to their effects on average working Americans. Looking past the Trump era, these conservatives argue their movement needs to climb down from the ivory tower of hands-off economic theory and create a more practical conservatism that somehow embraces populism and nationalism while seeking to retain core elements of free market economics and Reagan's peace through strength brand of internationalism.
I'm thinking of, while you were reading that, I'm thinking of how the Tea Party conservatives over the last 10, 15, 20 years have pulled the Republican Party to that very conservative stance, but have also kind of, if you want to try to make the connection, I think, brought about the populism and the nationalism part of the party today. And so now you see that the intellectual side of the Republican Party is seeing that if we want to push these free market ideas and these trade ideas that we have, we need to incorporate that Tea Party idea of conservatism, that populist idea from the Tea Party. What we don't hear that concerns me about the Republicans is they've always been the watchdog of the economy. They've always been the watchdog of deficit spending. And I don't hear anything in that where they're throwing out that part of the Tea Party idea. They want to take the nationalism part and add that to their free trade stuff, which is fine. But I don't hear anybody in that article talking about the new Republicans being concerned about the deficit, which I think we've talked about 3 or 4 times this summer being a major issue coming out of this pandemic.
Some of the concern that you're going to sense from Lance and I deals with how everything that's being mentioned goes together on the whole, right? Because some of these things in and of themselves, I don't think are bad. For example, the contention here, their movement needs to climb down from the ivory tower of hands-off economic theory. I've thought that for years. I mean, all growing up, right? I thought that was one of the big faults of the Republican Party is they often would talk about, right, the principles of the economy. And I felt like they're not addressing the concerns of everyday people. And I think the idea of moving towards we're going to be more aware of the working class, right? That's a good thing long-term for the party. Now, the way they're going to go about doing that, and that's where when it goes on, the embrace of populism and nationalism, right, while somehow mitigating free market economics and Reagan's peace through strength internationalism, those things seem more concerning, right, as to what does it mean that you're looking out for the working class. And that's what we're going to talk about coming up. To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Everything is not okay. Everything's not okay. That's the contention of the New York Times piece. We were talking about the Wall Street Journal piece in the first segment of today's show. And the New York Times piece basically highlights 5 key areas where there's this different vision for the country, right? These Trumpian principles, as the article calls them. And the first one is everything is not okay. The free market is not working well. Wages are stagnant. Too much power is in the hands of the corporate elites. Middle America is getting screwed. Finance capitalism is unbalanced. American society is in abject decline. If Reaganism was let's be free, the new mood is take control. And I think this one, Lance, I'll be honest with you, I think this sums up a lot of what I hear from people real well, right? Which is that they're not exactly sure what's wrong, but they know something's not right because they feel like they're getting screwed. And honestly, Lance, I do think, right, that there are some contentions here that have some truth to them. The first part of that, the free market's not working well, wages are stagnant, and too much power is in the hands of the corporate elites.
As with any statement, there are ways that you can interpret it to find support for that statement. I find it ironic that many of these people picked a free market individual who's made lots of money to bring about the change. So that's a little bit of a dilemma for me. But no, you're right. We all know that wages are not where they should be, that the upper 1% or even 10% of the population is accruing the majority of the wealth on the back of the workers. And the working class chose Donald Trump. You know, white males without a college education are supporting Trump and supported Trump because they feel like they are being left out of this economic boom that they see on Wall Street. So I understand that concern, and it's a concern that you and I have been talking about for years, you know, with an increase in the minimum wage and trying to, you know, alleviate some of the harsh economic times for the lower third of our country, who are working hard, who are going to work every day and just aren't making enough money to make ends meet. It's not a situation of, well, if they just worked hard, things would be better. No, they're not even making a living wage with that whole definition of a minimum wage when it was created back during the Great Depression. It was supposed to be enough money that a family could live off of. And so it's still an issue.
When I was running for office, right, and out canvassing, and for people that don't know, because I know we have, we're always picking up new listeners, Lance, right? We got spreading the word, bringing people in, all that good stuff. And it's great that we do that. So a little of the backstory, I ran for local office in 2019 as an independent in our generally pretty red county. But the city of Urbana, which is the county seat here, it's probably more like 60-40, 60% conservative, 40% liberal, somewhere in that range. I was amazed, Lance, at how many people who were struggling to get by, right, living in poverty, how many of them were so supportive of Trump. And it's not a judgment of Trump. I'm saying that runs counter to what I think many of us have been taught, right, is that for a long time, the Democratic Party was supposed to be the champion of the working class. And here it was probably in the neighborhood, Lance, of half and half, or maybe a little more than half, who were wanting Republicans to win because they believed that Republicans would be the ones to look out for the working class. And I think part of this goes back to as well our geographic shift, right? Republicans are the ones that talk about middle America, or that you hear talk about it more, and who say middle America is getting screwed. And for whatever reason, Democrats don't want to say that. And I think all the Democrats really have to do is start by saying, yeah, we know you're getting the raw end of the deal, right? But they're afraid to do that because they don't want to they wouldn't want to upset their coastal centers.
So really what you're saying, and if you are, I agree with you, that the Republicans, Donald Trump per se, the Donald Trump Republicans have been smart.
Yes.
By at least they're talking about middle America. And so if I'm given two choices, one group's not saying anything about my hardships, and the other group is at least talking about my hardships, even if they haven't corrected my hardships, at least they're talking about me and noticing me so they get my support, which would spell out when you drive around our community the number of Trump for re-election signs versus the Biden signs. So even though they haven't seen the economic growth that they have been promised, just for the very fact that Trump continues to talk about them lets them continue to support Trump, because the Democrats under Biden are not talking about middle America much at all. So just the simple fact that you mention us and you say you're concerned about us will get our support.
Exactly. Well, and it's what Lance and I've said how many times, the Republicans come to win, not to be nice. And the Democrats want to be nice and don't seem to care as much about winning. And that's why they don't win as much, is because they're too concerned about, being nice to everybody, which is nice, but not if you want to win. So the Republicans,
not in the political system that we have set up in our country for the last 200 years. That doesn't, that's not what happens. So unless you change the system, it's like we always say, if we're going to play the game, you and I are going to figure out how to win. And as we've said, that's what the Republicans do. Here are the rules. Okay. So for the rules of the game, the Republicans play to win and the Democrats play to be nice historically. And unless you change the rules of the game, that's not going to work. You play the game to win the game, to sound like an old football coach. Herm Edwards there. Shout out to Herm Edwards. If it's winning an election, that's what it is. I mean, that people may be offended that, what do you mean it's a game? We're electing our leaders or whatever. Well, okay, but how do you approach the outcome? Are you just playing to have fun? Are you running to just have fun, or are you running to get elected?
One of the things too, I'd like to object to in the New York Times piece. Now, granted, it's a long piece and they actually do explain some of this. So I don't want to just sound like I'm slapping them here too hard. They call them Trumpian premises or premises. I think it's important to note a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, right, was starting back in 2010, 2008, right around the financial crash time, that's when all this stuff started. Now, these sentiments have been articulated, right, by Trump and by the people that follow him, but he didn't create them. He's not the maker of these things. He just recognized them, like Lance said, right? You come to win the game, and you find what people are upset about, and then you speak to those things. And I think part of the challenge is that the Democrats, and it's clearly upset the left side of the Democratic Party, right? They're trying to mitigate all these different views and all this different stuff. So then they don't seem strong on anything. They just seem kind of meh on lots of things. And I think that's part of the problem that I see with the strategy as a whole. Yes, with Biden's campaign generally. And just to be clear, I think there's a difference between you can be strong and be centrist, just to be clear. I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. I'm not upset that some of his policies, right, are more center of the road. I'm upset that it doesn't feel like any of them are like, we got to do this because these things are about the future of our country. And when you listen to Trump and you listen to his supporters, right, they do have a different vibe about it, about the urgency and the importance of what it means to move forward with this ideology.
So do the Republicans continue to, since this is a show about the Republicans, are the Republicans going to continue to ride that Trump, to ride in their campaign slogan, to ride that Trump train and continue to do this and be strong in middle America? Is that where they go after the Trump run for president here for a second term? I mean, if he loses, do they stay with this? Because has Trump hit a nerve of middle America that the Republicans need to continue to go for and then try to broaden their horizons a little bit? Or do the Republicans, this is an if Trump loses, do the Republicans just lose faith in middle America as well? As you're talking about the Republicans, I think they have a big decision here to make. Whether President Trump wins re-election or not, do they continue trying to go after this nerve center of middle America? I think that's a big decision that the Republicans have to face here in the future. Regardless of what the Democrats do, what do the Republicans do with that? If they feel the need to form a, quote, new party, do they base it around middle America, or do they leave middle America behind as well as the Democrats?
Just a quick note, too, about middle America. Depending on who you ask, you could be referring to different things. When Lance and I are talking about it, we generally mean it from a more geographic standpoint than we mean it necessarily from an economic one. Because as you and I were saying that, Lance, I was thinking, I don't know if the article ever specifies exactly what it means by middle America, but I could perfectly understand if people are listening. They're like, wait, you're talking about the middle class? No, that's not what I mean. Because actually, a lot of middle America, there's not a lot of middle class. There's lower middle class and upper middle class, but that true middle of the road, not there so much. So we do mean it in a geographic sense.
In one of your favorite terms, there's not a median. There's not a lot of people in the median.
Right.
And so when we're talking about, yeah, you're right. We talk about between the two mountains, between the Appalachians and Rocky Mountains. When we talk about middle America, that's what we're referring to.
Exactly. So I think, Lance, you've posed great questions, right? Is this the direction the Republican Party should continue? Because that's ultimately what today's show is about, right? Whether Trump wins or not, maybe the answer is the same no matter what. Mm-hmm. Well, to find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Everything's not okay. Economic libertarianism is not the answer. The working class is the heart of the Republican Party. China changes everything. The managerial class betrays America. Those are the 5. Sorry, had to count there. Those are the 5.
You didn't even have to take off your shoes. Come on, man. That was pretty easy. It was only 5. You could have just put your fingers up. Come on, simple math. I know the new math that we do in school these days. I don't understand, but the old math, I can still count to 5 without taking off my shoes, and that's a real positive.
If you're gonna do math now, right? We got to draw the we got to draw the box, right? Divide it into 4 quadrants, and then we put some numbers up at the top, and then some other ones here on the side.
No. If I'm drawing a box and doing lines, making a grid, then I start coloring in. I don't waste numbers on it. My artwork, it's up for sale. Anybody wants to contact the station. Justin has many of my graphic design work through the box, through the coloring in of the box method.
Yes.
It's a new artistic wave I'm trying to start.
Box art.
Yeah, box art.
Box art. And crosswords too, right? We have both available. So if you want a Lance Jackson original
completed
crossword.
Wall Street Journal crosswords in ink.
Yes. In ink. Yes. Important because he doesn't make mistakes.
Nope.
Well, we don't sell the ones that
we just write a new clue.
That's right.
If my word doesn't fit, we change the other clues.
Well, your word fits, right? It just may not be the right answer to the clue.
Not the one that the writer of the crossword was looking for.
Gotcha.
But that doesn't mean it's a wrong answer.
All this talk about, and I'm sorry, we're getting a little off, but I have to. I've told listeners now, Lance, for a few episodes, and we just haven't done it. Chart versus graph, because I drew something on my paper here. And the question is it a chart or a graph? And so we got to bring in our producer because we got to give him the opportunity to tell us what he thinks the difference between a chart and a graph is. And if he's looking it up on his computer right now, we're going to have words. You have to try.
No, he's not. I'm watching him.
Isn't a chart more considered to have like a plotting points, whereas graphs can expand into that, but those are more like considered like bar graphs and things of the like.
So you actually sort of have it switched.
Oh, really?
What happens when you can't count to 5?
Generally, make it easy for people, right? If there's a X and Y axis, right? Okay. And what I'm drawing here is like a 90-degree angle. If you can see a 90-degree angle, whether or not there's actual lines, and there are at least 2 sets of data that are being communicated in some way, right? So bars, lines, whatever. That would be, generally speaking, a graph, which is also a chart. A chart is merely any visual representation of data. A bar graph is a chart, but it is also a graph. So a graph is really a type of chart, is the way to think of it.
I feel like my education system has failed me in learning that.
So what is that? How does that fit into the Republican Party?
Well, we did grow up here. I'm going to tie it all back together. We did, Devin and I both grew up right in the great area of Urbana, Ohio, which is one of those rural areas, which is in Middle America. And we're talking about Middle America and the future of the Republican Party and how they're invested in, or they say they're invested in Middle America.
I mean, I think we're going to see a free for all after the election, whether Trump wins or loses. I think we're going to see a free for all for power within the Republican Party.
They're not sticking with this.
Going to have, I think there will be people that stick with him and think that's the direction of the Republican Party. I think there are some Republicans, maybe like a Tom Cotton or somebody, Nikki Haley, who might stick with some of Trump's ideas to try to fill in the power gap that's going to be created, if not early in Trump's second term, at least, as you mentioned, by the midterm, after the midterm elections, there'll be that power gap created. And I think we'll see some Republicans step in and try to say, we are the next Trump. You know, those of you supporters of Trump, we're the ones you want. We want to take his place and continue his legacy. If the president doesn't win re-election, I think we're going to see a lot of these Republicans like a Lindsey Graham and that part of the party who have stood behind Trump totally break with the president's policies if the president loses to Joe Biden and start to try to bring back a new group of Republicans to challenge the centrist Democrats. So I think whichever way the election goes for the Republicans, we're going to see a major power struggle to who succeeds Trump, whether it's the group that takes on his policies and continues down that path and tries to broaden the coalition a little bit, or if once he wins re-election, there's real pushback from the old guard Republicans who say, okay, now it's time for us to fight to take care of the party, to take back the party, because you're on your way out. So I think we're going to see either a major shakeup or a few people try to ride the coattails and broaden the coalition?
I think it's definitely going to be a jump ball here in the Republican Party. They're going to be a lot of different people reaching and trying to kind of assert themselves, right, as the new direction of the party. And I think this speaks to a larger point, Lance, that you and I have talked about before. I think both parties would benefit from considering casting out these people that really aren't part of what the history of the parties are on the whole. Let those people do their own thing and have their own party, right? As opposed to this continued, like Lance was explaining, this, what's going to be a power struggle. And then what happens is, right, whoever wins, everybody else just gets behind, even though that's not what those people believe. I think that's part of what leads us to where we are in this country, of this idea that it's us or them. And when we say them, it's everybody else is in that category, right? Because there aren't other categories. You're either Republican or Democrat. And I face that a lot, Lance. I mean, you remember, because you were helping a lot with the election. I face that question all the time, right? And people would ask other people who were working on the campaign about, they'd tell them, well, he's an independent. And they'd say, well, right, but is he a Republican or a Democrat?
I think an important fact to tell people, and I think most of our listeners probably know it, but none of us stop to realize it. Nowhere in the Constitution or in the discussion of the framers of the Constitution or our founding fathers are political parties mentioned. Political parties are things that mankind created once the system of government was put into place. It hasn't always been Democrats and Republicans. So the names have changed. Who supported them has always changed. It's a fluid evolutionary process between, what groups of people have followed Democrats in the past and what groups followed Republicans. But there's nothing that keeps us to a two-party system. So what you're talking about is, if some of these people who have different opinions want to break away and start their own party, that's perfectly acceptable. There's nothing in the rules that limits us to just having two parties to listen to. I mean, the Republican Party per se, has only been around since the 1850s, and it came in as part of a power struggle with the Know-Nothings in the American Party and two or three other parties that were taking on the Democrats in the time. And the Republicans just shook out of the bag as the other major political party. But there's nothing in our rules or laws that say we're limited to two.
No.
So by all means, break out and give us some choices. Give us some selections.
I'd like to say too, Lance, I mean, if anybody's listened to the show very long, they would know that you and I, neither of us, right, were supporters of Bernie Sanders in terms of neither you nor I ever wanted him to be president. We didn't think that was the right direction for the country. But I wanted to say this. I wish that Bernie Sanders, right, had, instead of trying to run inside of the Democratic Party, I wish that he had opted to start his own party, or even do it now. You've run for president twice. You literally have millions of supporters. And the reason that I want that, right, because people out there are confused right now. I'm sure some of our conservatives, wait a minute, you said you don't like Bernie, you don't want Bernie to be president. Why should he start his own party? Because I think that's what we need. Those people will get more of what they want, and the rest of us get more of what we want if we quit being convinced that we have to fit into these two camps all the time. Because when we do that, we're giving up more of what we want by forcing ourselves into these boxes, as opposed to being with a party, right, that more closely represents more of what we all want. And then that party can compromise with other parties. But we're not even starting at that point. We're giving up so much of our individualism immediately by saying there's only two parties and there's only two ways of thinking. And that, to me, is part of what causes the problem. So yeah, I'd like Bernie Sanders to go off and do his own thing, right? I think that, somebody like your Ted Cruz's of the world, right, or your Marco Rubio's, they might have similar opportunity to do that. Or maybe somebody like John Kasich going for some kind of centrist party, right? I think there are opportunities for people like them to do things like that, but they're so shackled in their own ideology to this concept of needing a political party.
We are so patriotic and so American that we want to see our system change because we think it will bring about a better America. We're not down on our country at all. We just think that the system as it's set up, as you've mentioned twice now in this segment, is the cause for many of our problems and disunion that we have. And we think maybe the breakup of the two-party system would create a better, stronger America, not a right-wing America or a left-wing America, just a stronger America in general. So our patriotism and love for our country is found in, we would like to see the system change so we can all come back to work for the same common goal and not have to feel like we are divided into two separate camps that have to argue with one another. And then we get back to working for what is best for all Americans.
And I think that's a big key, because if we want to avoid, right, serious, possibly irreparable division in this country, I think we have to start recognizing that. That's part of why I mentioned, and I'll just mention it again to listeners if, depending on whether or not you heard it before, The Social Dilemma on Netflix, because I do think it talks to a lot of these people that have worked in tech and said, look, people didn't get into this with devious intent, but that doesn't mean devious deeds aren't happening. And I think that's very much the same way it is with the parties. The parties weren't started as an evil thing, right? Their purpose was good. The idea of let's coalesce people, right, around common ideas and principles because we're stronger together than we are separate. That's a nice idea. I mean, that's kind of the whole idea, right, of the United States. I mean, that's sort of the premise of the country as a whole. But what's happened is we've gotten down to just two parties, and it benefits these two parties to drive the wedge deeper between all of us. And that's what we keep failing to see. That's not the government. That's not the country, right? Those are the parties that are doing this. And they're, as Lance pointed out so aptly, they're not part of the Constitution. They're not part of government, other than that they control government right now because we let them do it. And they're going to resist that change as long as we allow them to resist it, because it benefits their continued survival to resist it and to drive us apart. That's, I think, Lance and I's contention on the whole. The problem with both parties is they have to evolve and go on from here, and hopefully have to break into different parts.
The company we work for, True Chat, right, has a mission statement. And that's why we had this conversation today, because we're trying to follow that mission statement. Our mission statement here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And I think, Justin, that's what you and I tried to do today by telling this to people. We're not down on anybody per se. We just want to have that respectful conversation. We would like to see that take place throughout the whole country. Instead of these people yelling and screaming at each other and nobody listening, we want to listen. And it's important for you to go out there and do that and share this with other people. And if you do that and they say, well, how do I listen to these two guys talk about these great topics in an open, respectful manner? Well, you can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
Can the Republican Party be saved? I think the answer is yes, if they push out the people that aren't Republicans, and if we move toward an America where more people are represented, not less. That's the key, and that's, I think, what our show's about as a whole. You can find The State of Us Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast by 4 a.m. in the Eastern Time Zone, and it's a syndicated radio program as well, so be sure to check your local station to see if they carry The State of Us. And if they don't, call them and tell them they should. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson. Special
thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Butch. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.